When the Goddess Wakes, The Ring-Sworn Trilogy, Book 3, by Howard Andrew Jones. Narrated by Lori Prince. Prologue. A short wall topped with lantern-bearing pylons separated the amphitheater's descending seats from the outer grounds, and he had yet to advance past it, for the uproarious laughter of the crowd repulsed him. He leaned against the wall in the twilight, frowning at the players who walked the garishly lit stage below. It would have been gracious to excuse the people of Kanesh for failing to mark this day with proper reverence. The struggle had occurred a realm away, after all. But he was not in a forgiving mood. 2 years before, hundreds of the best and brightest of all 5 realms had perished, snatching victory from certain annihilation, under the leadership of Commander Rennick, assisted by the tactical brilliance of Naor, the sorcerous might of Riala, and the far-seeing eyes of the fierce Koi. The Altenerai had driven back an immense Naor army that had marched into the heart of the fragments. Yet here they were, no parades featuring veterans, no banners marking gratitude, and no songs spilling out to the spirits of heroes, just an unrelated farce to divert the masses. On stage, 2 men crept with exaggerated care past a sentry walking with a spear. One of the stealthy pair strove to knock the guard unconscious with a blow, missing when the sentry turned, again when he knelt to dust off a shoe, and yet again when he bent unexpectedly to sneeze. With every failure, the audience hooted in delight. Calandra had introduced him to this play, one of Ceylana's comedies, and Calandra had insisted they attend this performance. But he found no sign of her, and wasn't entirely sure he wanted to look. He longed to be away, alone with some wine, somewhere his annoyance was less magnified by the indifference around him. Such a sentinel, favored by fortune, must meet a fairer snare to be undone. The words were those of one of the play's intruders, pulling a wig and dress from his sack, but they were echoed by a woman behind him. He recognized Calandra's voice, but turned to behold a stranger. It had been a long while since he'd seen her out of uniform. A winking hairband ornamented her dark curling hair, lustrous and loose. Ordinarily, she pinned it tightly back. The lantern on the pillar behind set her generously sleeved blouse aglow around her bared neck and shoulders. Flowing pants graced her long legs, and she had donned sandals ornamented with delicate sparkling filigree. "Well, well," he said, then sketched a bow. "And until now, I thought the view across the lake the finest to be had here. You've set a new standard." "Flatterer. Sorry I'm late." He offered only an empty hand, turned over as if it were a small matter. "No time to change?" "The patrol ran long," he replied. The silence grew between them as he failed to admit he hadn't wanted to make the effort. She appraised him soberly, while the audience clapped for the newly feminized actor sauntering seductively up to the guard. Then Calandra lightly leapt to the wall, patting the stones beside her. He hesitated before joining her perch. She leaned forward and spoke earnestly, in time with the distant actor guard boasting to his female interest while the remaining thief slipped through the archway behind. "None dare these hallowed halls while I stand guard. No other eye is half so keen as mine." The crowd erupted in laughter. Calandra smiled at him, and her delight penetrated his gloom, softening and illuminating its source. "You were late because you were losing time with hearthstones again." He was so sure of the answer he didn't phrase the words like a question. She sighed at him. "Is that what you want to talk about? We're here together. Isn't this a better way to remember Riala than sitting alone in a dark corner with a bottle and a full measure of resentment?" The crowd was rocked with laughter in their seats. She always saw to the heart of his thoughts, but he wasn't going to let that deter him this time. "I'm sick of those damned things. They killed Riala. The Queen and Balan are obsessed with them, and no one can tell where Commander Rennick has gone, except that he's hunting hearthstones." "The commander always makes it back," Calandra said confidently. "Until now he has. Are you going to get lost, too?" She placed a hand over his. "We need to know where they come from, what they are, how best to use them." He swore. "So you are going to keep at them?" Her voice lowered so that even he had to strain to hear. "My assignment comes straight from the Queen. This is important, Kirkanal." "Screw the Queen." She flicked him a sly smile. "Is that who you have your eyes on next?" Calandra had never let him forget Queen Leonara had overtly flirted with him during a banquet a year ago. The best part had been Denovan's obvious and impotent rage while he watched farther down the table. Until that moment, the reference had always amused him. "The hearthstones may be dangerous," Calandra conceded, "but they're a significant source of power, and the Queen isn't foolish to seek them. The Naor have us outnumbered 10-1, and Mazakan's still plotting our end. We need all the help we can get." "Which is why we need all the Altenerai on the alert, not chasing pretty rocks." She frowned. "You'd really rather argue politics than enjoy the play?" "What I want," he said, "is for you to be safe." He realized the absurdity of that sentiment the moment he stated it, and added, "As safe as can be, given our circumstances." "You're treading awfully close to that line we agreed not to cross, aren't you?" "No talk of futures, right? There's a war on, and we're in the vanguard." "So why agonize over what we can't control? Should I rend my garments every time you scout enemy lands? We're not carefree lovers. We have jobs to do." "But right now," she reminded him, "this night, we're together." She squeezed his hand. "Riala wouldn't want us arguing. We shed enough tears the night she died." "You're right," Kirkanal agreed. It was that shared grief that had finally brought the two of them together. A relationship that had surprised him most of all, for he'd been fairly sure as he came up the ranks that Calandra hated him. "I'm usually right." He bowed his head. "Very well. I set my worries aside. Your presence before me commands the whole of my attention. My eyes are for you, as well as my lips and my fingertips." With slow deliberation, he lifted her hand and gently kissed it. She repeated the gesture, and he felt the light touch of her tongue against his final knuckle before she released it, even as she favored him with a lascivious side glance. As he moved to meet her lips, the scent of honeyed blossom soaps and the softness of the fabric she wore surrounded his senses. Desire burned bright, like a sun breaking from a summer storm cloud. She pulled away, laughing silently, and looked into his eyes. Few stared that deeply into those fully dark orbs. He knew they found them unsettling. Her regard always pleased him. "None can compare," he announced simply. "Not even the busty girls you were sneaking around with in Dendressi in your squire days," she teased. As though measurements equated with beauty, he replied with formal, if slightly exaggerated, sincerity. "My lady, I am a connoisseur who has browsed amongst the lesser wines. You are the rarest vintage." "I'd be more flattered by your analogy," she whispered, "if you weren't a fan of such syrupy sop." He quoted Ceylana. "I seek no solace in your bitterness. I'd find a sweeter wine to while the hours." She laughed aloud, as did the crowd, though they were clearly attending to a different line, and he was delighted by her pleasure. "Now hop to it, Alton," she said, and took up his hand again as she dropped from the wall. Apparently, they were finished with the theater tonight. "There are moments to seize." "Aye," he said, following. "I treasure every one that we share." "Sometimes," she told him, "you know just what to say." Only sometimes. Yes, only